Hi, I'm Scott Lowe with Actual Tech Media. I'm here today with George Wadner, who's a Senior Product Marketing Manager for Pivot3. George, thank you for having us in your offices today.
Thanks for having me.
So we've talked with others about some of the key differentiators that Pivot3 brings to the hyperconverged infrastructure market. We want to talk now about some use cases and what your clients are experiencing with specific use cases around hyperconverged and what they're doing with Pivot3. Okay. So let's start with VDI. Tell us a little bit about what you're bringing to the world of VDI and what some of your customers are experiencing with the Pivot3 solution.
Sure. I'd first like to start with some of the challenges that customers are running into. I mean, if you look at the benefits of VDI, there's both an IT benefit as well as a customer benefit. All right, so there's operational and security on the IT side. So now I can take what used to be desktops that are on insecure laptops that might get lost or stolen, and move them into a more centralized IT environment where they're protected by traditional RAID methods and backups and snapshots, etc. And then on the flip side, there's the customer benefit of being able to do their work on multiple devices, so more flexible for them to kind of to work and be more productive. And then there are several factors involved in making sure that it makes sense financially for the customer. ROI, obviously. So is it going to be, am I going to be able to get rid of my inexpensive laptops and purchase infrastructure for my data center? It needs to be, you must have a much lower footprint to get in there than you would in order to make it make sense financially, right? So one of their objective is to minimize that footprint, and then user experience, they're your ultimate stakeholder. All right, so I was a former IT guy, so it's you don't want to have them calling you for any reason. So you want them to have a completely transparent experience there. So if they're happy, you're happy. If we're talking about what makes us different from a Pivot3 standpoint, it's that not all traditional architectures are meant to handle virtual infrastructure, right? It's a very complex workload, and you have you have desktop users who are all different, right? You have producers. There might be your application developers or people who are rendering videos, for example, and you may have your support personnel, like administrators, like personal administrators and such. And you want to be able to take and ensure that the users who need the performance get the performance. So, with that, if we're talking about delivering more performance, smaller footprint, the way that we're designed really meets those needs. We have a multi-tier architecture that includes RAM as a read-ahead cache. It includes NVMe flash as a read cache, as well as a write cache, and then your traditional SATA, SSD, and hard drives.
So when we think about VDI specifically, there's some key points in the process that can become bottlenecks. One is booting up, because there's, we always hear about it as a boot storm, and people think, well, we have to read all those virtual desktops, but it's not just the read side of things that's creating a problem. When a system boots, there's all kinds of stuff being written to logs, and so it's the write operations that can actually really hold things up. So with using the ability to use memory as the read side of things to cache virtual machines, it seems like you have a key differentiator there as far as, or a key benefit there as far as being able to accelerate those workloads. But the NVMe read-write cache seems like it would be just as important from a writing perspective as system boot, so you can avoid those boot storms. Is that inaccurate?
Absolutely accurate. So the great thing about these systems, our Acuity platform for HCI, is that every single write that happens in the system happens in NVMe flash. So it's ultra low latency performance. I think we're seeing upwards of 6 times the performance of traditional HCI architectures. And because we're doing multi-tier, we're able to consolidate much more and get it into a much smaller footprint, about 3x lower footprint per node.
With the NVMe architecture, when are you acknowledging a write back to the application?
We have 2 NVMe cards in that cluster. It's written to one, forwarded to another, and then at that point it's protected, and then acknowledgement goes back.
Okay, so it's not just on the local node, which would be insane.
Yes, it would be insane. Yeah. So no, we definitely, we appreciate that that a customer is putting all of their workloads on a single system like ours that scale out, it's high availability. So we need to guarantee that that data will be available in the event of a node failure, card failure, et cetera.
And I'm sure that plays well in the VDI space where people are working on documents actively and things like that. So if there is a node failure, they're not going to lose data.
Not only that, it's completely transparent, but we actually, when we size the units and we talk about the performance that a Pivot3 HCI cluster can deliver, we typically do that performance guidance based on a single NVMe card, not on two. That way, if one fails, it still performs at the performance levels that are expected. And the reason why we're able to do that is with our policy-based quality of service.
Right.
And so, customers go in, they've got simple policies that set performance levels based on the performance need of each of the individual users and their data. And then if there is a node that goes offline, or there's resource contention, for example, the system makes the decisions based on the customer's preferences, and that may include throttling down performance for some of those lower level applications and increasing performance, ensuring that performance, I guess, is sustained to the more critical workloads, like your power users, for example.
Understanding that storage has often been the bottleneck in VDI scenarios, it would seem like that the caching mechanisms that are in place with the Pivot3 platform can also enable increased density of VDI deployments on a single node. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, absolutely. In the multi-tier architecture, there's a percentage. The largest percentage of capacity that's in each one of our nodes is either going to be SATA SSD or SATA disk, depending on if it's a hybrid or all-flash node. Mm-hmm. But because we're using NVMe flash in there, it allows us to provide kind of a greater breadth of performance without having to include a ton more footprint into the system. I mean, it's a PCIe card, just plugs right in. So we're able to get maximum density for our more economical capacity, but also get the lower latency, high performance for where it really matters.
Beyond VDI, there's lots of other things people are trying to accomplish today. One of the key things they're trying to do is get to a more modern data center footprint.
Yes.
How is Pivot3 helping on the use case of data center modernization?
We think about the reason why folks are going and trying to modernize their data centers. It's a lot of that is the applications that are driving it, right? They're more complex and they require different supporting infrastructures than they were using in the past, and a lot of that has to do with people are hearing buzzwords like software defined or cloud and all these different things. At the end of the day, they're just enablers to help customers do more. So from a software defined standpoint, we are using industry standard platforms, so x86 platforms with simple policy based software to make it easier for customers to not have to be a performance expert, to not be a storage expert, or any of that, and just be able to use one user interface and to really do everything in.
What are some of your clients seeing when it comes to outcomes, like business outcomes, based on the data modernization efforts that are undertaken on Pivot3?
One of the more recent case studies that I was kind of going through prior to this interview talked about a customer who had taken in the UK who supports professional organizations, HR organizations, who took and took down a kind of your more traditional 3-tier architecture and replaced it with ours, reduced footprint, and they determined that it was about an 18-month return on investment for what they were getting out of it. So, predictable performance, the lower footprint, and not only that, but being able to manage all this infrastructure with one or two people versus needing a huge team of specialists.
All those operational improvements add up.
Absolutely, yeah.
So surveillance is another key use case for Pivot3. It's hard to talk about Pivot3 without talking about surveillance. How are you helping customers improve their surveillance methodologies and processes?
Pivot3 was founded around software-defined storage that ultimately became a great fit for surveillance. And it's a simple infrastructure that combines for those customers who are using NVRs, single NVRs they're managing individually, right, one at a time,
right,
or they're using traditional 3-tier architecture, three-tier infrastructure that was designed for IT, not really designed for the high sequential write workloads of a surveillance system. We provide a really unique value to them because they're not. You're dealing with folks most of the time who are very familiar with security, but not so much with IT. And with our system, they don't need to know IT. It's a simple user interface. They can go in, they can provision, the storage, the back-end storage for their systems. The way that our scale architecture works, we're able to ingest very quickly these sequential writes for video. So there's no drop frames ever. It's highly available, so if a node fails or a drive fails, you're not having to go back and look for missing data or rebuild. It's all right there all the time. So while there are technologies that you and I are very familiar with on the IT side, I think it's great that it translates into surveillance and really provides us a solution that is kind of bar none differentiated and provides a lot of benefit to our customers.
Early on, VDI was the use case for hyperconverged infrastructure. Obviously, enterprise applications have taken much more of a focus as hyperconverged as an entire market has matured.
Yeah.
Tell us what Pivot3 is doing to help enable more in the way of enterprise application deployments than we used to see in the past, and what are some of the outcomes your customers are seeing from their enterprise application deployments on Pivot3?
Like you said, VDI. I mean, if you talked about hyperconverged, it was always linked hand in hand to VDI, right? And it was, and for the most part, even up until now, a lot of the deployments, are meant to handle one-off kind of point applications, whether it's VDI or a database, what have you. The kind of the chasm that needs to be crossed in order to get customers into using it for traditional consolidation of enterprise applications is that it needs to deliver consistent, predictable performance. And as you know, Scott, with traditional IT, one of the main challenges, traditional storage, one of the main challenges is resource contention and being able to deliver predictable performance when you have an application workload that is just overwhelming the system, whether it's an application that you care about or don't care about. If it's winning, others are losing. Right. So in order for hyperconverged to be successful, it needs to address that challenge, and we do that with our policy-based quality of service. So customers go in, they may have an assortment of mixed application workloads. They can assign policies to each one. They may have an order database that is mission critical. It generates revenue. That gets a mission critical policy and gets, if there's ever resource contention, it's going to get resources diverted to it, whereas on a test and dev database, that's just not going to be the case. It gets performance when it needs it. However, if push comes to shove and there's resource contention, we're going to ensure that the applications that need it most get that performance, and that's really what the enabler is going to be for customers who want to use hyperconverged for general IT.
This idea of general support is critical, I think, for the future of the platform for hyperconverged and everybody that's in the space. So we look at databases, analytics, and other mixed workloads. How is the quality of service engine making a differentiation between what's important and what's not? Is that user definable, or is it looking at workload patterns to try to figure out, here's what I think is important?
Well, it actually uses our customers' input. So a customer, they may not be performance experts, but they know what's important to their business. So they'll tell you in a great way. I've told customers to figure this out before if they didn't know for sure, was if everything went offline and you brought it back up, what would come up first? What would you bring up second, third, fourth, etc.? Those are going to be defined as your mission critical, business critical, and non-critical workloads. So customers define them. They set those policies. We have 5 policies built into the system, and those 5 policies define minimum performance in terms of IOPS, throughput, and then maximum latency. So that just sets the minimum performance levels. And on top of that, there are service levels associated with each one of those, which are mission critical, business critical, and non-critical. And those are what at the end of the day are going to decide what happens when there's resource contention or if there's a node that goes offline. And so the bottom line is the customer defines everything. And all we're doing is we are making decisions on behalf of the customers, of the business's, imperatives and wishes.
So with all these use cases, let's say we have a customer that's adopted hyperconverged across their organization, Pivot3 hyperconverged. What are the metrics that they use to say this was a success? This worked for us. This was great. This is what we wanted to do.
I think for the customers I've spoken to in the past, that they look at the savings and kind of operational savings. So fewer man hours, full-time equivalent hours that are used to manage the system and keep it up and operational. From a performance standpoint, We talk to customers who have improved transaction rates that result in higher revenues. We have a credit card transaction company that used our system in the past, and I believe still does, that saw a major increase in the amount of revenue that they were able to generate over the course of the year. But also because we are highly available, there's those intangibles that you never really think about data going offline until it does. So our erasure coding, our scale-out architecture keeps the data online all the time and available as well. So I would say more productivity, more revenue in the case of that, customer satisfaction in the case of our customers who are using our systems for web-based online transactions, for example.
Well, let's think about VDI for a second. What's a critical outcome, that people would say this is what we wanted to achieve? Is it density? Is it the user mobility aspect? Is it more enablement? What are some of the key things that people say this made this project a success for us by moving to Pivot3 VDI?
I think you hit them all.
Okay.
You think you hit them on the head. I mean, it's like I said, it's earlier. It's two things, right? There's two pieces to this puzzle. One of them is operational and efficiency on the IT side of the house. But at the end of the day, you want this to be completely transparent to your end users, and you want them to be as productive as possible. And with the performance that we have in the system and the way that we manage that performance and ensure that it gets where it needs to be, we find that our customers who are deploying this, that their VDI, the users are none the wiser that anything's changed in the background. All they know is now they're able to use their desktop, their laptop, their iPad, their iPhone, work from home, be more be more productive. And fewer phone calls to them means just, you've done IT in the past, and so have I. And it's the fewer phone calls you have, the happier your life is.
Yeah. I always said, the help desk is a critical thing, but I'd love if the phone never rang. Not because I don't want to help people, because I don't want them to have to be helped.
Absolutely. You want to be a hero, but at the same time, you want to be a silent hero.
Exactly. George, thank you very much for having us in your offices today, and thank you for this great discussion.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
And thank you to our audience for watching this video.